Let's start this afternoon with discussion of two business cases. Our headline is Our Road Towards Accessibility, and we are joined now by one company from Norway, Bokbasen, and one from Sweden, Bookbeat. Representing Bokbasen is Per Andreas Alnes, Product Manager Digital Distribution. Välkommen. Yeah, I can't hear you right now. Let's try that again. Per?
Do you hear me now?
Yes, I hear you now. Very good. Thank you.
Okay.
And from Bookbeat, we are meeting Daniel Saidi, OS and Mobile Architecture Lead. Welcome.
Hi, thanks. Happy to be here.
Hi, good to see you too. Now, I'd like to start with the two of you just introducing your respective companies briefly. Daniel, perhaps you could start and explain, what does Bookbeat do?
Well, Bookbeat is subscription service for audio and ebooks. So users can join in on the exciting books that we have to offer, and they can consume them by listening or reading them on smart devices.
And Per Andreas, what about Bokbasen?
Yeah, so Bokbasen, that's the Norwegian book database in English. So it's kind of harder to explain what we do. So I'll try. We're sort of a hub for the book industry in Norway. We are a service provider to the Norwegian publishing value chain. We serve publisher, bookstores and schools, universities and libraries, and also corporation.
I'm going to have to press you a little bit. What do you serve them with?
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So what we do is we've been since 2007, we've been doing cataloging, that is collecting metadata, gather, manage, standardize, and enhance, and ensuring the availability and distribution and accessibility of this metadata. And then for the last 10 years, we've also been doing the distribution of digital content for literature, ebooks and audiobooks. So there's a common Norwegian system for that, and we operate that system. And on the last couple of years, we see to carry out our mission as a distribution partner, we have to build platforms. So we also run and develop platforms where publisher can meet customers, and we have different platforms. So the customers are libraries for one platform, and universities and higher education, and also university libraries for the Albit platform. And then we also build a platform where the publishers can meet grade school, and we can digital distribute textbooks and other learning material for them.
That's interesting. I mean, you're a company, clearly, but you essentially provide essential infrastructure for the industry. So that comes with a lot of responsibility. Before we go on to talk more, I would also like to know what your respective jobs are. What do you do day to day? Daniel, would you like to begin?
Well, I'm in lead of the iOS platform team. So, well, basically it's the Apple platform team. So we focus on the Apple ecosystem. So build support for our product to exist on iPhones, iPads, in the car, on the watch, anywhere where Apple is, we should be. So that has been my goal now as iOS lead. And I also focus on the mobile architecture. How do the mobile clients that Bookbeat have interact with our central APIs systems? How do we enforce business rules in the mobile context? How can we provide users with a great offline experience and stuff like that? Yeah. That has been my main goal, but also focus on the more soft questions like accessibility, for instance. How do we handle tonality and localization in the app is also.
Yeah, it's funny. It feels to me like one thing I'm learning today is accessibility is moving from a soft question, so to speak, to a basic requirement. And Per Andreas, at Bokbasen, what's your workday like?
Yes, so I'm the product manager for digital distribution. That means the platform dimension. It's essentially my goal to see that those meet the requirement by the users and the customer, but also some financial goals towards those platforms. But being a hub and infrastructure, most of my days I spend a lot of time talking to the different stakeholders, making sure we get them to everything to run smoothly on this on the infrastructure part.
Yeah. So the story I'd like for both of you to tell during this conversation is about your journey towards accessibility. So how did that start, for instance, at BookBeat?
Well, just to reconnect with the previous, when I say soft question, I think I mean challenges that are more subjective, like do we have good tonality, do we have good translations or localizations, while many technical challenges can be of a more concrete, like, yeah, we did it right, it's performant, it's fast. This is more exploratory for many companies, I think. Well, at BookBeat, I think that for many developers who come from the web, accessibility has always been there. I mean, we've been dealing with making websites accessible since 20 years ago, like with being able to tab around the web page and trigger stuff without using a mouse, for instance. Also putting in alt text. And I think the web has been a great environment for that, because you always have this evaluation tools that you can trigger on the website. Like, does this website meet the standards expected from a modern web product? At BookBeat, I think that at least from my experiences working with Apple technologies, I think that Apple has always been really careful to express how vital a great accessible product is. And they often do that with their yearly design awards, for instance, where they often promote and give awards to developers who put great care into the accessibility and make their products accessible to as many people as possible. And I think that having an award centered around that is really inspiring for a lot of people, which I think really helps in putting accessibility as a hotspot for mobile developers. When it comes to BookBeat, we've also always known from the start that it's important. And we made early efforts to get a good baseline going. And we also shared our work in local user groups, talking about accessibility and stuff like that. And but it wasn't really, I think, until MTM, the Swedish agency for accessible media, approached us and asked if they could help in our processes, that we really, the world of accessibility opened up, and we saw how vast this area is and how many areas where a product can improve, from just being able to reach all parts with a voiceover to have great color contrasts, and yeah, and a UI that makes sense.
I love that you look so excited when you talk about this. That's these challenges are also interesting and stimulating. Would you say now that it is that these issues are understood throughout the organization, or is there still is this still something that some departments, so to speak, are more invested in than others?
Well, I think that we in the app team has been, since we also have the product that reaches the hand of people, like we have perhaps got the opportunity to focus more on a user interaction way, together with Access Lab and MTM, to meet our users and talk with them about these topics. I think that the organization also understands. I don't really know about the efforts of other teams, like for instance the web team, but everyone knows that it's important, and we do our best to provide our users with the best accessible experience as we can.
And then over in Norway for Bokbasen, how did your awareness of this start, and where have you gotten to by now?
Well, Bokbasen has been working on accessibilities for quite some time, but I know I have co-workers that probably are listening now that's been working with that since the 80s. So I'm not going to take any credit on that. I'm fairly new to the industry and Bokbasen as well, but I've been working in software development for the last 15 years, and for some of the larger digital consumer brands in Norway. And what sort of my awareness journey looks like is that it all started with sort of when the first companies started to get their fines for not having compliance in their websites. I think there was one big airline companies that was the first one to get fined in Norway. And then it sort of comes on the agenda, but as something that we should fear, or you should do this or you get fined. But out of that, I saw that a lot of the developers themselves, especially the young professionals that were making these sites, making these apps, got sort of an intrinsic motivation to make their product good for everyone. It's sort of motivated by doing good. They wanted to put their craftsmanship into making it as easy as possible and to get as many as possible of the users to be able to use their product. So that's sort of very, very hope. It brings a lot of hope. And then you see that your role as a manager is more of a, okay, don't get out of their way to follow their passion. Don't make systems that sort of ruins their drive and motivation. And then you start looking at, okay, what's your role as a manager and as a company? And you see that I think most companies have some sort of vision or mission statement that sort of goes directly into making your product accessible for everyone. And I know that Bokbasen has literally the mission statement to make books or literature in Norway accessible. So that's sort of the awakening when you see that, okay, it's already there. All you have to do is connect the dots and make the professional make their product the way they want it. And we talk to Daniel and see how he is as an iOS developer and how motivated and how inspired he is to make good products for everyone. That's sort of the same thing. And then the awakening is, well, what is your role? And I think Bokbasen is, as you said, infrastructure. So our role is to make infrastructure so that more literature gets accessible in Norway. And at the same time, what is not your mission? And we listened to Molly this morning. There's so much things you don't think about. So focus on some part of the value chain that you can do really good and try to improve that.
I'm interested. I mean, this thing that you're both speaking about, in a way that a lot of this passion, you can find a lot of passion for these topics in the technical among the developers. And because we've been talking about the importance today in previous sessions about identifying ambassadors in the organization, and I think perhaps sometimes in publishing, as in other parts of the culture sector, we can have preconceived notions about who would be a good person to advocate for something inside an organization, and it can absolutely be somebody with a technical job. It doesn't have to be, for instance, somebody in communications, or it doesn't have to be a senior manager who has that, as long as you, as you say, get out of the way of the passion. So I'm very inspired by this insight. If we look a little bit at some concrete challenges, Daniel, for instance, you already mentioned that you were doing these tests together with MTM. What were some of the lessons for your team from, for instance, having doing tests with readers with print impairments?
Well, I think that before MTM and Access Lab, I was under the impression you understand instinctively how big this, how many impairments there are, of course, but not perhaps how it affects using your products. So a big learning that I had attending those user meetings that we had was that, for instance, vision impairment, that's a whole field in itself. And you also have things like dyslexia or rheumatism that really, you suddenly start looking at your product in so many new ways, and a feature or a screen that you build that you perhaps thought was, oh, this is so great, it's so easy to use, and then you realize that, no, it's not. And so many of the learnings that we had now is that, for instance, we were careful to set up UI testing early on, so that as long as you can programmatically reach all the parts of your application, that means that VoiceOver can reach all parts of your application. And then you add some localized accessibility hints and labels, and then you think you have a good accessible experience, but that's not, being reachable is not being accessible, I think. And we're still learning, but it's really an inspiring learning process, I think.
At Bokbasen, you launched something called the Alvit platform. It's a digital platform for textbooks in Norwegian. What were the accessibility challenges with that specifically?
Yes, I think that's a good example of the basic problems with accessibility. So I think Norway, like Sweden, is a highly digitized society, and as time, I think this was back in 2017, 2018, we started looking at distribution of digital books, textbooks for higher education university in Norway. And part of the problem was that there wasn't any books available at that time. So that's a big barrier for accessibility. And I know that our part, we're talking a lot to NLP, which is the Norwegian Library of Talking Books in Braille. They have done this work since I was a student, since forever, to make textbook digital accessible. But in a big commercial sense, this was not the case in 2018. So that was the sort of the biggest challenge, because then we had to talk with our good friends, the publishers, and start a sort of an industry-wide effort to get them to produce their textbook in a digital format. And this was done in record time. I think it was done within 12 months. So we have like the most common textbook in the Norwegian language available for the universities. And another part was that when we talked to the students, they would like to have the way they would like to study was on their laptop computers. So most of these textbooks were, and we used the LCP encryption, they were limited to the iOS and Android sort of hardware encryption. So we also had to make a system that was accepted by the publishers, but also worked on the student's choice of a browser. So this is just an example of an accessibility problem that doesn't even start to any special challenges. But I think it shows that if you want to do a big company or an industry-wide effort, it's possible to do, and you can get people to collaborate on making this available. I think now we have more than close to 3,000 or 4,000 titles available in bookstores and also in the university libraries.
I'll just remind the viewers at this point that you can, of course, ask questions of both BookBeat and Bokbasen. But Per Andreas, just to continue with you, so where are you now with the Norwegian publishing industry? Because it seems even to be able to do the textbook platform, you have to take everybody on a very rapid journey together, and it echoes in some ways the process that for instance, Hachette Livre went through that we heard about earlier today. Have you been able to build on that and make other types of books as accessible across the industry?
Yes, there are people want to do good. They want to do this. What sort of limits? What the reason why it's not happening fast? Because I think there are technical issues. I think most of the project that has been done on the technical infrastructure side has some sort of life cycle, and much of the strategy that sort of made the basis for the investments that are done right now was done in a time when what was infrastructure is not the same as now. I think now we can more, if we start collaborating on making the infrastructure common. We have an additional problem in Norway. It's such a small country with regard to the Norwegian language. So the infrastructure cost will be pretty high per book or per line or per title. So we will have to do these projects in collaboration. And we have to sort of define what is the part of where the publishers want to be differentiate between each other, and what can be sort of a common infrastructure layer that everybody can invest on. But I think the intentions are there, and I think we can see some great things over the couple of years.
Yeah, that's great. Then that's very promising. Daniel, what about in Sweden? I know in 2019 we saw a drop in book sales across channels really in Sweden, except for digital subscription services, which bodes well for you. And of course, the demand for audiobooks has risen even more during the pandemic. I know that for BookBeat, UX has become, user experience has become part of the strategy. And how do you place yourself in this changing landscape?
Well, if we look at, I don't know if I answered the question right about UX, but if we take what we learn and how we change with the requirements of for instance, the European Accessibility Act and things that we know are coming, I think it's what we try to do now is distribute the responsibility of the accessibility efforts that we have within the organization. So for instance, if we go back to the UI tests that I mentioned before, like programmatically asserting that all parts of the app is reachable, that is now responsibility of the Q&A team, for instance. So we're not just the developers doing this, we're distributing this knowledge and the efforts within the organization. And we also need to have internal discussion about the agreements and the contracts that we put in place that says what we can do and can't do with the content that we provide to our users. For instance, if we go back to the Amazon talk earlier, that we can have a amazing synthesized voice. How would providing such an experience within our app, if you could have the amazing Monty Python gang read your favorite book, your favorite ebook, and we also have the same book as an audiobook. Do we have to change the way that we sign licensing deals with the publishers, for instance? So it's not just a technical challenge for us with the accessibility. As technicians, it's always so much that you want to do and play around with new technologies and provide the best user experience, but then there's also legal aspects to take into consideration, and we're trying to navigate our way around that.
Yeah, you mentioned the European Accessibility Act. How would you think it'll change the publishing industry and your job? Are you intimidated by it, or do you feel you're pretty well set with the timeline?
I'm excited for it. I really think, as I said, for instance, being able to provide captions to an audiobook, for instance, shouldn't be, now I speak from a personal point of view, but it shouldn't be like something that you need allowance to do. I mean, it's just making content available to more people, and it's democratizing content. So I think that should be like a no-brainer, if you'll excuse me to say that.
I'm thinking, yeah, sorry, yeah.
But then, of course, I realize that it's, when you go into the various roles of various people in this publishing, content providing dance, and of course people have various areas of focus, of course.
Yes, I'm just realizing that a lot of publishers listening are getting gray hairs in real time, thinking about the rights challenges in hand if the different media and the different formats become one. And I think also actually we'll return to this later today when we talk about audio specifically. What about in Norway? Of course, not an EU country, but you follow along with the EU in a lot of fields. How does the European Accessibility Act affect you?
Well, it will affect us. I think that, and I'm not that worried. I'm with Daniel here. I kind of look forward to it. It's back to sort of the don't get away within people's passion and making content available. That's there's no other better reason to get up in the morning than just to do that. And if the EU needs to sort of standardize checklists or something, I think we can manage to follow that. Not talking for the whole industry, but that's this is very software development centric. I've been working on GDPR when I worked in telecom, and PSD2 when I worked in finance. People they understand why it's there and why it does good to the society. It's motivating to work with.
That's great. We have a question here from Mary, who would like to know, how do your organizations convince publishers to produce accessible ebooks?
Should I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so for us, I mean, that's actually one thing that has been a technical limitation for us. We had an ebook reader engine that couldn't handle EPUB 3, for instance, that very well. So I think that BookBeat is a Bonnier-owned company, and Bonnier has been wanting to provide us with accessible and like with EPUB 3 content for quite some time, but we haven't been able to fully leverage that content that we've been given. But now switching over to a new reader engine with much better support, that's really amazing to be able to provide even more content to our users.
And what about you, Per Andreas?
Yeah, we work very closely with the publisher. I think it is creating work. We do the standardization and the metadata standardization of it, but we'll just continue sort of the continuous improvement to get this to work, because there's the technical aspect of it, getting it to work fast, timely, and with high integrity as well. So there is some work that we work well with the publisher on that. Publishers.
That's great. We're running out of time. Thank you ever so much to both of you again, Daniel Saidi from BookBeat and Per Andreas Alnes from Bokbasen. Thank you to you both.